Welcome to Pressure Point. I'm Brad Newcombe. When a loved one is dying, life for everyone involved is completely changed. Is it possible to care for our loved ones as they die at home? And what about after death? Can families and friends be involved in handling the body and preparing it for cremation or burial? Well, with me to talk about this and this experience are two people who have gone through it. And I'm happy to welcome Marion Irish and Tom Bowman. So thank you both for coming and sharing something that is obviously a very personal journey, and I look forward to hearing your stories, as well as maybe sharing some of my own. To start with you, Tom, maybe you could just share a little bit about the experience of who was this person in your life and what was happening at the time prior to death and the story around that.
Well, his name was Ewan. An older man in his 70s and had prostate cancer. And, he tried everything under the sun. He's a very inventive, individual kind of person. And I found him one night. I heard a noise, went out, and he was lying in the hall. His spine had given way. The thing had metastasized to a tumor. Took him to hospital, which he hated. He just hated the institution and the regularity. And so somebody, it wasn't myself, I think it was a friend of mine, said, I think we could look after you at home. And he just was radiant. And we brought him home, and for 7 weeks we looked after him 24 hours a day. We organized it carefully. There were quite a crew, about 30 people actually. And there he was in Community Alternatives, just over the way there.
And now that, when you say Community Alternatives, that's where you were living?
That's
was it
where
kind
we
of a
lived.
commune kind of place?
Yep. Yeah.
Was he part of this commune?
He was part of it.
Okay.
Yeah. And he became much more part of it during those last weeks, believe me. Because it's such an intimate experience, dying. I mean, we had to wash him and clean him and, you know, all of those things. We had enough people so that nobody was worked too hard, but it was hard work. But his graciousness, which wasn't usual for you to be gracious, but somehow he found his dependency in this process, and we all found a new level of bonding. It became quite ordinary, actually, just routine over the weeks.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about that experience and what it meant to you and to other people involved, but I'd like to now move to you, Marion. And what was your experience to share here about death and being close to a loved one?
It was my brother, Bob, who was in his late 30s when he was diagnosed with cancer. He also had a young son and wife who were involved in the primary care of him. Bob was very adamant that he die at home. He wanted to be in his own home. He wanted to be on the property that he loved, where his garden was. So we really wanted to have him die there. And we had the backup also of knowing that hospice was there if we needed to. But as I said, we were able to do that at home. Friends and family were involved in his care. I tried to get over as much as I could. There'd be periods of a week or so when I'd be able to be there with him. It was very important for me to be involved in all those concrete ways that you care for someone. I wanted to be near him. I loved him deeply, and as a small child, cared for him when he was young. So it just seemed very right for me to be there again with his wife, caring for him. And all that involves, it means washing the person, turning the person, massaging their feet, being up during the night with them. It was long at times, but there was also the support of other people around. And it was a very meaningful and profound time. And I was very privileged to be there, sharing that with him.
I mean, I can tell just by talking to the two of you, just by your voices and just, you know, just the way you remember this, you can see how deeply you've been touched by this experience of having someone, a brother, and someone, a friend, and someone who became even closer to be with them as they die. How did you bring the support groups together? You talk about, it's more than just individuals. You talk about a group of people coming together, being very organized, working long hours, being very attentive to the most personal details of one's being. How did you bring these people together?
We were faced with a fair amount of resistance at first. There were a number of people who thought that it wasn't appropriate to bring him home, and they didn't want to take part. They were afraid for their children, what would happen to the children having somebody dying in the same building with them. But after we had him home, and we were talking about Ewan, and Ewan was there, and it became, as I say, more or less orderly, or ordinary. It wasn't so. Everybody in the building took part.
How did the children react? You mentioned just something about children. How did they? Parents were frightened, so how did they end up responding?
First, one parent, Daddy, brought his 2 children to see you, and he thought he would do that. And it was wonderful to watch. The children stopped at the door, and they knew him, of course, and they said, "Hi, Ewan." And Ewan smiled. He loved having children there. And they came in, and they talked about a few things, and then quietly went out. And then it became, the other children came, and it became a rather regular thing for the youngsters to come in and see Ewan. And they didn't have a concept of death. I don't think children do, but they knew he wasn't going to be there anymore. He was going to heaven or something. And I don't know what the bond was between, I think there's something very childlike about a dying person. And the children intuited that, I think. And it was lovely to watch.
Marion, when you think back to your brother's death, and how has that changed you and your approach to living?
Well, I had also been around death before, and I found for me it involved me very profoundly and very intensely. And in a way, it's the way I live my life, and to be there in a very deep way with someone, just the actual cleaning of that person, for example. I remember one day after being with my brother and going through the cleaning, the bathing, the dirt, all of that. I remember going out in the field in front of the house and just centering myself, and there was this sense of, yes, I was in touch with the universal. All of a sudden, I felt rooted, and it felt like I had to go through all that. I had to go through the work, the intensity, the dirt, to get to that place of rootedness. And that has been a center for me from which I live my life.
Was there pain? Was there a lot of pain in each of these circumstances? How did you deal with that? We talk about practical, concrete things, and that's one of the reasons why people are often in the hospital, is because they have better access to pain relief.
Ewan's pain was pretty well under control. We were able to give him morphine at a regular basis. And also the community health nurse came in at least once a day, sometimes more often. But we had nurses who were part of looking at the team. And so his pain level was pretty good. And I think his mood was pretty good during that time. He felt cared for. He felt at home. Huh?
And you mentioned also, Marion, too, that you knew there was a hospice nearby if you needed one.
Right, and at one point we had Bob go into the hospice just so that his pain could be managed, they could assess that. And he was there for 7 or 8 days, which was also important for us too, in the sense of knowing that if resources got a little low, he could always go in there for a few days, and he felt very comfortable. So he said he would be ready to go in for a few days, and then, but always would want to return home. But it worked out really well, and there was some morphine that Bob was given. They tried to keep it at a minimum because people really wanted also him to be present with his wife and his child and his friends.
And not to be so delirious that he wasn't able to sort of be conscious and cognizant.
Yeah.
What happened after death? Because one of the things I know that you talked about cleaning the body, not just beforehand and all those things, but what happened after death?
After death, well, perhaps I'll first mention just we were there at the time of his death.
Okay.
His breathing changed. I decided to sleep that night right beside him, and as I said, I heard the breathing changed, and I called his partner, and we got up together, and we were both there, one on either side of him, holding him as he took his last 2 or 3 breaths. And we lay him down. We both had a cry and held one another, and we wanted to have time with that body now. We didn't want to phone anybody. We were able to have him there that night, and there was a real comfort in connecting with him still. It just seems like when you've been so closely connected with the body that it's very difficult to detach right away, that body is still precious to you. You still want to care for it.
Did you talk to him?
Did I talk to him?
Like at that time, after, with the body and things like that. Do you still talk to him and things like that?
Oh, I still, I can still, I still do that.
Yeah.
And after the night, we did phone the doctor later on, but we also had decided that we wanted to we wanted to bathe the body and get it prepared for cremation. A friend of Bob's had made the casket, and he had finished it that night at 12, just around the time that Bob had died. We gathered friends and family around at that time in the morning to be with us, and then his partner really wanted to take the body and bathe it and prepare it and clothe the body as well. At that point in time, we were getting down to some practicalities that had to be dealt with, like the paperwork. And I went into the nearby town to the vital statistics office and filled out some forms to get permission to take the body into the crematorium. And as I was signing the form, I realized that I was signing as the funeral director. And I had the death certificate with me, and then took the papers back, and then we took the casket over to a little cabin. His wife wanted to keep the body for 3 days. It was sort of the end of February, so it was fairly cool out. The body was placed in the casket, and then we took it over to the cabin, which allowed people to come and just be quiet with the body. We told stories about Bob. Mm-hmm. His young son came over, and also my young daughter, and they spent time. And often the lid was closed, and sometimes they took it off and took a little peek. The casket was all lined with cedar boughs. My nephew at one point had a crystal in his pocket and said, "Aunt Mary, I'm going to put this crystal in this casket." So that was all part of the process of that time, which was very important. And we finally stood around just before we took the casket in. We all formed a circle around the casket, said a final few words, and then we all helped lift the casket into the station wagon. And that station wagon Bob had traveled in many times to go skiing or to go on back roads. So it felt quite at home. And the friends and family took him into the crematorium. When they came back from that journey, they were absolutely elated. It was a time when they felt very powerless, and here was a concrete thing that they could do. They arrived at the crematorium and there was a trolley, and they said, no, there's 6 of us here, we'll take Bob to his final resting place. So they went through the crematorium, and the fellow who made the casket was able to actually light the torch. And they felt that this journey was completed. And as I say, there was just joy on their faces that they were part of this final journey with Bob. And that was a very important time for all of us, and for them to know that they had done that, and for them to come back and share that story with us.
Well, it certainly sounds so much more connected to the whole, I mean, to the person and to just everything. I mean, it makes that Bob and Bob's death so much more a part of everything. I mean, it sort of just spills over into, you know, your family and friends, and and somehow makes it. Does it make it easier, or does it just change it? Does it give it more meaning, or what is it?
Well, it really integrates. It integrates it for us, and it was almost like the healing process had started. That we were able to say goodbye in that way. I know, for example, you can't always do that. It was right for us, and it's not, it doesn't, it's difficult for some people to be that involved in the process, especially if they haven't already talked about it and worked it through themselves. I've talked to a number of women that have talked about how difficult it is after they've cared for the body at home, to all of a sudden have strangers come in and take the body away, and they're left to imagine where that body is, and they don't know where it's gone. And they said there's just real relief that after the 2 or 3 days they know the body's been cremated and that time's been over. But several have mentioned what a difficult time that is for them.
And not knowing what's happening and who's got it and what's happening. And
right,
so
and
on.
that separation that comes, that all of a sudden the body's gone. I'm finding that a lot of people now, or a number of women I've talked to, who have said also that they have managed, whether it be in the hospital or at home, they've asked for time just to be with that body before it's taken away. And I think that's really important if that need is there, for that need to be answered.
I think that I would say that too. I mean, I've known people who have also wanted to be close to the body and to, say things, or, stroke hair and just, feel the body and be in the presence, really. Tom, what do people need to know if they want to, like, if many people don't know that there are these options out there, how do people get to know that,
Well, I think you have to have a little bit of courage, because you're breaking some of the taboos of our culture. But more and more people are doing it. You have to know that you can. When my mother died, my brother and I made the casket, and we bonded in a way we hadn't done for a long, long while in making that casket. And then my wife and daughters washed my mother's body and clothed it and put it in the casket, and we wheeled it down to the chapel ourselves. And somehow, like Marion is saying, doing all those practical things with the body, it's very empowering. Somehow you're not defeated by it. You're sad, you're missing the person, but you're actually participating in the death in some way, and that makes it, you transcend it somehow.
And you're taking care of somebody who's been a part of your life, and somebody who means something to you.
Feels right.
And you're taking care, and it is I can understand what you mean by bonding and connectedness. But there's a lot of people in our society who, what you're talking about, were really just the polar opposite. bodies are removed from hospitals, they're removed from homes, never to be seen again. There's cremation. People get a little urn of ashes or whatever. What are the consequences of, and that is a people's choice, but often people don't realize there are other ways to do it. What are some of the things that can happen when we're really cut off from those things you're talking about?
Well, I think grieving must be very difficult. I don't know, there hasn't been any point at which you could say participated in the end of things, so you can't start again. I don't know, it must hang on and hang on. You'd have to live in some kind of denial for a long, long while, I should think.
I would think.
I don't know.
I was thinking of a young man whose 3-year-old son had died, and he said he was very intellectual and very much in his head, and he just couldn't grasp this. And he said, it wasn't until I pounded those nails into my son's coffin that I finally got in touch with that grief. So I think this is a very concrete way of getting in touch with grief, and it helps you do that.
When you hear the breathing stop, you know it's over. And when you get the body and put it in a casket, you know it's over. In a way that releases you to, your memories are still there, the relationship is still there, but they're dead.
Do people find this hard to talk about often, don't they? I mean, like, are you able to share this experience? Not that you would, every time, but if people find it uncomfortable, how do you sort of make it easier?
Oh, yeah, there are people that certainly do find that uncomfortable. I also respect their feeling uncomfortable too, and if they, express some need to hear some more, then that's okay. Otherwise, I'd let them be with that, and even if it's just a start, they know it's there. And then I would give them the space to be where they need to be with it.
Right, and so in other words, you don't force...
I wouldn't push it, yeah.
Push it.
Oh, no,
Yeah,
you couldn't
yeah.
preach it.
No,
No.
I guess not.
But the people who were against it in our building to begin with certainly weren't at the end. The whole group sort of celebrated. We had a huge funeral right in the courtyard. And everybody felt, I don't know, good. That they had done this, and Ewan wanted it, and we'd been with them in it, and so the funeral was a celebration as well as a time of sort of sad saying goodbye too, of course.
And you're talking about people who were not real keen on being in hospitals, but hospitals have really changed, in the last, couple of decades with palliative care, and certainly much more sensitive to the needs of families and people who are dying. But there's still this real desire to be at home, isn't there?
Certainly for Ewan. He's a rebel.
Yeah.
And the people in the palliative care came to see him and tried to talk him into it, but they didn't succeed.
Once he made his mind up, he had his mind made up, and there was no changing it.
Not that I think palliative care is wonderful, especially for respite like your brother had. To give the family a rest once in a while, to have that resource is very important.
Any hints for people who would be interested in sort of banding together friends and family to do this? Things to watch for, to sort of make it go a little easier when you're bringing together people.
Right. Well, I think a program like this is really important, just for people to start, talking about it.
That's right. It's something we can talk about ahead of time, isn't it?
That's right, and I think we should. And also, you need a fair number of people, a sort of support system. You couldn't do it just alone, I don't think.
No.
You'd need quite a few people. It's a big job.
It is a big
It's
job
not
because
easy.
you talked about the cleaning and
Oh, yes,
all
indeed.
hours of the day and night and being
24
attentive.
hours a day, yeah.
And then there's the people have regular lives. Plus, there's a kind of grieving process going on before someone dies as well, isn't it? Because life has changed.
That tires you out too. That heavy emotional side of it does tire you out.
And wanting to say the things that need to be said, and
Yes.
worrying about the right time, and
Yes.
those kind of things.
Ewan was so gracious, though, to us all. This rebel changed right around, and he supported us as we cared for him. It was wonderful. Part of the bonding that took place.
Oh, I was just thinking also that for people to be really gentle with themselves around a time like this, and maybe they can't do it at home as much as they'd love to do it. Maybe the resources aren't there. Maybe it's an elderly person trying to look after their mate and they can't do it at home. So they decide to go to hospice, and there's all kinds of ways you can work with that. Just recently, I know there was a roster of people that went into the hospice to be with someone because they wanted that person to always have a companion with them, and so they worked within that setting, but it brought in as many family and friends as they could and did it there.
Right, so that there are those options that people can be either at home or in a hospital, but what you're talking about that people need is the support.
You have to have the support. And if you do it, you'll be glad you did it that way if you can. You know, like Marion says, if you can.
If you can sort of be open and
be free to do it yourself without, like when Ewan died and we clothed him and laid him on his bed and put his skis and ski poles on either side of him because he's an avid skier. Yeah. And when everybody came in, chuckled, and it was just right because he was off somewhere.
Right. But I mean, I think it's great. Here we are talking about that. You're right. You see, there is something healthy and healing in the fact that there's laughter too.
Yes.
I mean, there's tears, but there's also laughter.
Both.
And that's the we from the time we're born till the time we die. That's how it goes. We are out of time now, but I want to thank you both for sharing such meaningful and personal stories from your lives about something I think that we all need to talk about. So thank you, Marion, and thank you, Tom. I've been talking with Marion Irish and Tom Bowman, and we've been talking about caring for loved ones as they die at home and taking care of their body after death. Thanks for joining us on Pressure Point. I'm Brad Newcombe.